golden rules are simple. Please don't take it personally if we interrupt you and steer you back to a question if you stray off into talking points. Please do feel free to interact with one another, to challenge one another, right up to the limits of the golden rule. And for candidates who filibuster or get out of hand, Kristen has...
I love the bell.
I won't have to use the bell, I'm sure. You'll be much more... I will. If...
Our first question. You've knocked on our door. We're busy, but we'll give you a minute to introduce yourselves, and we're going to ask each of you to differentiate yourself from your opponent. 1 minute, please. Left to right, Governor.
Okay. Good morning again. Thank you for the time. The battle for the future of Illinois to save our state has begun, but it is not yet won. We've had great successes in education reform, criminal justice reform, government operating reform, but we have a tremendous amount to do still to lower property taxes, grow more good-paying jobs, and end corruption. A woman came up to me recently, elderly woman. She was frail, she was small, couldn't move very quickly, but she came up to me. She grabbed my left arm with both hands, and she looked up at me, and she began to tear up. And I said, gosh, what's wrong? What happened? And she looked at me and she said, Governor, you're our last hope. Please don't give up. The people of Illinois want us to stay strong. And now we take the battle from just a battle to a revolution. This is a revolution. This is about the people of Illinois rising up against corrupt politicians in a broken system. It's not about Democrats versus Republicans. This is about taking power back from the corrupt insiders and giving it back to the people of Illinois. And we're going to do that this election by having the people of Illinois ask all the candidates for office to support term limits, and ask every member of the General Assembly who's going to be a candidate to be reelected to vote to put term limits on the ballot, and to vote to have Mike Madigan not be Speaker. Vote for anybody other than Mike Madigan as Speaker.
Thank you. Ms. Ives, a minute. Introduce yourself. Differentiate yourself, pardon me, from your opponent.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Ives. I'm a 3-term state rep from the Wheaton area, and I'm a mother of 5. And I'll tell you what, I know just like you know that the politicians in Springfield have not done the right thing by you. You know, for 3 years now we've been in this battle, and Governor Rauner wants to pretend like he's something different and that he's taken the fight to him, but the truth is he threw in with them. And you know it, because you're not better off today than you were 3 years ago. Look, the election's a referendum on what Governor Rauner's done, and he's got nothing done. And I'll tell you what, I've been there for 5 years, and I've been fighting for taxpayers. I've stood against my Republican friends. I've stood against Democrats. I've stood alone on votes because they didn't make sense for taxpayers. That's why tax accountability endorsed me over a sitting Republican governor, because they know I'm going to fight for taxpayers, and they know that's the right thing to do. So elections are referendums on what's gotten done in the past. Governor Rauner can't pretend to run, 2014 all over again. He's had 3 years to sit down there and do something. He's done nothing. So I'm asking for your vote, because you can't buy what the Democrats are selling you, and you can't trust Governor Rauner.
Governor Rauner, I think you were inaugurated 3 years ago, almost to the day. What is your response to not only Representative Ives' comments about you doing nothing, but also the exodus of Illinois residents also speaking to their confidence in government and in you? 33,000 residents left Illinois last year. What do you say this time around that's going to convince people that A, you can still execute an agenda, and B, they should stick around for it?
Yep. So the exodus has been going on for years. We have been losing people out of our state because of the job losses, the corruption, the brutally high property taxes. And Madigan's power throughout the government needs to be taken away from him. We've got to take power away from Madigan and his cronies and give it back to the people of Illinois. That's why this election has got to be about a revolution. Power away from him back to the people. We do this by getting term limits on the ballot, getting the candidates for office to put term limits on the ballot, promise, sign it in a pledge to put term limits on the ballot, and promise to vote for anybody else, any Democrat, any Republican other than Speaker Madigan, to hold that speakership, that power. If we make that change, we'll have elected reform-minded, candidates for the General Assembly, reformers, Democrats and Republicans. This is not a partisan fight. This is not about Democrats versus Republicans. It's about a corrupt system that's taken power away from the people and hurt them, pushed them out to other states and other locales where they have a better quality of life. This election will win. We'll win because we have the message, we have the team, we have the ability to beat Madigan and his hand-picked candidate for governor, J.B. Pritzker. They are all part of that crony network of corruption and self-dealing. We can beat it this election, and we're going to beat it.
So I guess I'm confused because I heard this from you 3 years ago when you were running and when you first got elected. I mean, term limits, the legislature hasn't done it. Speaker Madigan is going to be Speaker. I'm interviewing a lot of candidates who are running for office. I think I've talked to one candidate who's willing to, maybe not vote for Madigan as Speaker. What's going to be different this time around? Are you going to change your style in order to get your policies across the finish line?
It's not about style, it's about persistence and staying strong, not giving in, not backing down. When I was elected, we had a supermajority of loyal Democrats for Madigan, supermajority. No longer does Madigan have a supermajority. And this time, if we ask everybody to sign a pledge, vote to put term limits on the ballot, vote for anybody other than Speaker, we'll have reform-minded legislators, and then we can bring down property taxes, we can grow more jobs, we can end the corrupt culture. But you know what's exciting, Kristen, too, even beyond that? Even if Madigan stays in power, my first few years in office, I've laid the foundation for dramatic change in my second term.
That is patently false.
So watch what happens. Now as we hold the governorship, and I am the only person in this room who can beat J.B. Pritzker in November.
That is completely untrue.
When I hold the governorship, we will be able to prevent Madigan from gerrymandering districts after the 2020 census. It's essential, because if Pritzker wins with Madigan, they will control the map, and it will turn out the lights in the state of Illinois.
I can stop that.
Okay, on those that is completely false.
Which
the governor's gotten nothing done, and nothing's going to be different. He picked a personal feud with with Mike Madigan. He didn't build the coalitions to get the reform that was necessary. And even if Mike Madigan was there, it didn't matter. There's so many other tactics that he could have done. Let's just go down a few of them. First of all, on school funding. He sat here a year ago, and you had a separate meeting with him, and he said, well, Chicago's getting more than their fair share. We're going to make sure that that doesn't happen. But he didn't insert himself in the debate on the school funding bill. He didn't stick up for property tax owners in the suburbs and statewide, knowing that Chicago's assessments are completely out of whack. And then you guys come out with the trilogy of articles from Jason Grotto showing how unfair the assessment process is. Well, that feeds the funding formula. If he had taken a strong stance on relooking assessments, you would have got a better deal on school funding. Instead, his wine-sipping buddy Rahm, after the passage of the school funding bill, said, we got everything we wanted and more. Now that's outrageous. He did not cut a good deal. On top of the school funding deal, it's just a crony bailout of Chicago, and it's a promise we can't keep. And how do you know it's a promise we can't keep? Because that bill requires $350 million more every year for spending. And the governor's budget only has $200 million going more into education for the next 5 years, which means a different formula takes place, and it means that Chicago gets the preponderance of any new money going to schools. He actually told you as well, why should we fund schools when they're losing student population? And yet that's part of the bailout.
Well, I know you call it a bailout, but there were, we've talked about your issues you had with the bill, but there were conservative Republicans who I think you respect who voted for it, who are willing to take the trade-off to have opportunity scholarships in exchange for what you consider to be. So
the trade-off for 6,000 opportunity scholarships when you're decimating the suburbs and taking our school money, that's no trade-off. And I would argue differently, actually. I would argue that conservative Republicans, the ones that I'm mostly aligned with, agree that that is a bad deal. Regardless, it's a promise that's not going to be kept, because already his budget doesn't even fund the $350 million.
But if we want to use that as a jumping-off point for somehow, if a Republican is elected, trying to find a sweet spot in the General Assembly where we don't want a yes man going down there with Mike Madigan, but there has to be something other than stalemate. And the school funding bill might have been an example of compromise, and you were a no on that.
Yes,
so how can you? What is the sweet spot as far as you're concerned?
Well, you can
in pushing back when necessary, but not getting us back into this moment of gridlock.
That's a great question, because it's universally agreed upon from South Suburban Cook County to the suburbs to downstate Illinois that we have a problem in assessments. Now, I handed Governor Rauner over 2 years ago a task force that would have highlighted and exposed exactly the game that's being played against taxpayers on the assessment issue. And he said, well, we're in a budget crisis. Please don't file that bill yet. We filed it anyway last February. And when the Democrats buried it, I went to his staff and I said, run it as an executive order. This would have highlighted and exposed the games going on in Chicago. Who wants to pretend it's one of the property poorest school districts, when in truth, on the other side, Rahm Emanuel's bragging about the $10 billion in new revenue and new development coming in. You can't have it both ways. This task force would have been critical. It would have made Governor Rauner a leader on the issue on school funding fairness. And school funding fairness starts with an assessment process that's fair across the state. Look, in response to my questioning of superintendents on this bill, a superintendent from Perry County said to me, well, I must agree with you on this, Representative Ives. You're right. Assessments are not done fairly in the state. In fact, we haven't had a reassessment in 35 years. Well, who thinks that we have a fair school funding bill if we can't get assessments right? That would have been a great starting point, is to hone in, and he could have started 2.5 years ago on the assessment issue, so that by the time the funding formula had come up, you would have at least had a fair assessment system. Anybody who believes that Chicago Public School has less property resources to fund their schools than Ford Heights, you have to question what data they're looking at. That is categorically false.
I want to allow the governor to respond, but I want you to respond too to where's the compromise? How are you going to be any different in dealing with the legislature?
This would have been
a task force. I mean,
no,
I think the governor actually proposed a task force, and we criticized it.
No, he didn't propose any task force on this issue at all, and this is endemic.
The bill that you're talking about, what would it have done?
It was HJR 139. You can look at it. The Democrats liked it so much. It would have exposed everything that Jason Grotto did in his trilogy of articles, but it would have done it far earlier. It would have looked at.
What was it going to do?
It did all the data collection that you need to do. It looked at what the impact of TIF districts was. Well, now they put that in that school funding bill. It would have looked at the impact, because we know they're hiding $6 billion in property wealth and TIFs in the city of Chicago. It would have looked at a computerized model of property tax assessment, something that Barrios failed to put in. That would have been highlighted and exposed way before we had the school funding bill that basically hid that from them. It would have looked at assessors and their qualifications. Look, in response, I asked IDOR, I sent them a letter, I said, look, there are assessors that aren't qualified and we know it. Sure enough, 55 assessors sat for election and were not qualified. The only reason we know that is because I sent a letter to IDOR to find out about it. So it would have highlighted that. It would have talked about consolidation of assessors downstate because they cannot find enough qualified assessors. Again, this is a foundational tenet of the education funding formula. If you don't get that foundation right, the numbers are never going to make sense.
Okay, I'll let the governor jump in on.
The education funding bill that we achieved was a bipartisan historic achievement to improve education in the state of Illinois. It has record funding for our schools, and it has more equitable funding, because we've had historically the largest gap between what low-income students have been receiving in the classroom versus higher-income students. We've denied the American dream to too many families in Illinois. I fought to achieve that reform, led the effort, and we achieved it, and it's historic, and it's great. Is it perfect? No, but it's great progress on a bipartisan basis, and two elements were critical from my view. We got more school choice. For parents from disadvantaged backgrounds, regardless of their neighborhood now, they can have more opportunity to choose a school that fits their child. We got equitable, equal per-pupil funding for charter schools. We've never had that in Illinois. That is historic, major reform. And we established a great new tuition tax credit scholarship program for low-income students to choose a school, not necessarily a standard public school, for their child. Historic reform, great progress. And Kristen, you asked one other part of your question that didn't get answered, and I want to talk about it. What will be different? Why should we have a second term? I tell you, not only will I be able to block the gerrymandering from Madigan this time, but I led the effort to get 2 lawsuits heading to the U.S. Supreme Court. One's there now, one there will be a year from now. These two lawsuits will transform Illinois and other states that are run by corrupt groups that make their money from government. One will change the balance of power between government union bosses and taxpayers and not have forced unionism in government. You watch what we can transform in Illinois and lower taxes.
It was actually
the other
the
one,
Justice Center.
the other one is forced unionism with labor regulations that this lawsuit will allow local governments to control their labor regulations so we can compete with Wisconsin, Indiana, Tennessee, and Texas. I travel the state pushing this my first year as governor. It's in the courts, and we're going to win. And you watch our economic growth boom in my second term when we win this lawsuit.
Well, we talk about...
Wait a second, though. It was Liberty Justice Center that ran the Janus lawsuit. It was them who did it. I, for one, signed on to the amicus brief that the Democrats ran up in Wisconsin against the Wisconsin Republicans on gerrymandering. I'm one of 17 legislators who signed on to an amicus brief that my national party, the party at the Republican National Party, opposes. I'm the one who's shown independence on saying, look, I am for a fair map, and I'll put it in. I don't care which party it is, and if I have control of it, it'll be a fair map for all. I'm not going to gerrymander it, and I signed on to that amicus brief.
Governor, you seem to be betting a lot that the Supreme Court is going to rule the way you want in that case. What happens if it doesn't?
I believe that we have a very high probability of winning the AFSCME lawsuit from all indications. I believe it's very likely.
I'm sorry, but
and here's,
if you're wrong, it's easy to see what happens if you win.
we keep working, we keep changing, we keep fighting. We never give up, we never give in. You know, as I travel
He gave up and he gave in. He caved
Please,
every time.
Representative, you're interrupting. Thank you. I'm respectful of you. I'd appreciate some respect in return. As I travel the state of Illinois, people come up to me every day. They say, Governor, stay strong. Don't back down. Don't give in. You're on the right track. Madigan's a problem. He's got to go. And many times they go in and say, Governor, yeah, I'm a Democrat. I don't even normally support Republicans, but I support you because you're working for what's right. They know that I'm fighting to help their quality of life. They know I'm fighting to lower their property tax burden, to get more good-paying jobs in their neighborhoods. They know that I'm fighting to end corruption with term limits and fair maps. The people of Illinois know it. They want it, and that's why we're going to stay strong. That's why we're going to win.
We were talking about this 3 years ago. These are bills that have been introduced. They're sitting in rules. I'm still trying to get you both on how do you work with the legislature? I mean, do you have any sort of a trust relationship right now with the House Speaker where if you were reelected, we wouldn't be right back in the same place we were? And I want you to address the issue that Representative Ives raised about publicly chastising him and picking a fight with him openly over the years, and whether or not that was really a smart thing to do. That maybe you keep that, behind closed doors.
So I know Speaker Madigan extremely well. Extremely well. We've had many meals together. We've talked for hours together. We've played golf together. I know him very well. He doesn't care about policy. For him, it's all about power and money. He cares about political strategy. Everything he does is about political strategy. The way to work with him, through him, is through his caucus. It's through his members in the General Assembly who are underneath him. He controls them powerfully, but not 100%. We had the biggest achievement for defending taxpayers by having one member of his caucus not show up to override my veto of a bill that the Madigan absolutely demanded and passed, and that was to take me out of contract negotiations with AFSCME. We were able to get one caucus member out and not override my veto. That saved Illinois taxpayers $800 million a year. Madigan is all about power and political positioning, not policy. We'll beat him by working through his caucus. That's why this election is so essential. Let's together get reform-minded Democrats, reform-minded Republicans who will sign a pledge, vote for anyone other than Madigan to be Speaker, and put term limits on the
You said
ballot.
that 3 years ago, too, and you met individually with House caucus members, and I don't know if the relationship building didn't happen, but these are things you said 3 years
Building a
ago.
relationship
problem
with a
here,
crook
though.
who's out to make money, become rich
Okay,
from
so
his power. That won't work.
now we're going to call Mike Madigan a crook in an
Yes.
open editorial debate. That's interesting because really what we should be talking about is policy and leadership, and how he's failed to lead on policy every time, and how he doesn't have the trust of our caucus. Look, I have more people endorsing
style
me.
issue with Madigan, because you said that it's not helpful to have these kind of public wranglings with the speaker. Do you believe that?
Oh, look, Mike Madigan's actually voted for my bills before. So I take that as a positive note. Not to mention, I've worked with his caucus members to pass far-reaching legislation. I worked with Greg Harris on HB 311 this year to increase network adequacy. It was a bill that I began 2 years ago, and I handed it off to Greg because he had better expertise, and I'm a chief co-sponsor of that major piece of legislation. I worked with Mr. Tibeti on protecting condo owners. He knew that it's a strong suit for me to protect them. He immediately grabbed my amendment and added it to his bill at the last minute, and it became part of a major overhaul on condo legislation. I worked with Sarah Feigenholtz, the sponsor of HB 40, on special service area reform. So when policy aligns, I work with them, and they know that I'm policy focused. Democrats come to me all the time to ask for my support on their legislation, or even ask my opinion about it. So I think that's really what I'm known for. I am so policy focused that when we align policy, we're going to align on policy. But the truth is, Governor Rauner's never going to get a chance to have this fight with Mike Madigan again. He's never going to get a chance because Republicans across the state don't trust him. He's betrayed everything that we stand for, and he's not elected. He will not be elected in November of 2014. I've traveled the state. They're mad that he made us a sanctuary state. They're mad that he put in taxpayer funding of abortion. They're mad that he won't say our president's name. He will not be elected, so he'll never get a chance to even try and do that.
Point of trust. You're 3 years in. What happened either in your administration or in the Republican Party that National Review would declare you the worst Republican governor in the U.S. and you would draw a conservative primary channel?
The issues of Illinois are the issues of corruption of Mike Madigan and his cronies. This are all political distractions. All distractions about other issues when we need to focus on Speaker Madigan and his corruption. And nobody has fought stronger and harder against that than I have, and we will prevail. We will prevail. We will win because we have broad support across the entire political spectrum. Madigan is running the system to enrich himself. He's become a multi-millionaire for manipulating the property tax system with Joe Barrios. It is corrupt. It is crooked. And the reason we'll win is we're exposing it, and we're exposing the fact that Pritzker is Madigan's hand-picked candidate for governor. He's in effect Madigan's bagman for funding that whole corrupt culture. By exposing it, we will win and we will transform Illinois.
He hasn't transformed Illinois right now. He's taken us fight for. He's picking on Mike Madigan again, and it's because he said he's not in charge. Governor Rauner said he's not in charge, and he's acted like he's not in charge. And so this is the result. Nothing gets done. Now, it's interesting that he wants to pretend that this primary battle is just about Mike Madigan. But the truth is, his base has left him. He will be Mark Kirked out of office because nobody trusts him anymore. And for him to sit here and say that he took on corruption, now, if you're not in charge of the legislature, and if you're not in charge of getting any of your agenda passed, the actual one thing that an executive could be in charge of is taking on public corruption. Because you're the executive, charged with enforcing our laws. You have the bully pulpit to do that. And I'll tell you what, you know how you get rid of corruption in the state of Illinois? You detect it, you expose it, and then you shame people into doing the right thing, or you put pressure on the state's attorneys to do it as well. It is a time-tested model of getting rid of public corruption. Why? Because that's exactly what I've watched Edgar County Watchdogs, the Better Government Association, and others do over time. When you expose it, then into the light of the day, it ends. He didn't even want to say. Actually, I went to his staff and I said, "How come you're not speaking out about Frank Montino? He's under federal investigations. Our sitting state auditor." His staff said, "Well, you know what? He's getting ready to investigate some of our agencies. We don't want to say anything." So how come you didn't talk about the Northern Illinois University president who got a $600,000 buyout after a scathing OEIG investigative report said he literally mismanaged NIU? And yet he controls the majority of the appointees on that board. He put 4 new trustees on the NIU board, and this is what the taxpayers get. We get to pay this guy $600,000. This is on the wake of the College of DuPage scandal, which I highlighted and exposed and helped get legislation passed bipartisanly, by the way. In fact, my Republicans rebuked me on that because they listened to their college presidents. I actually got Democrats to stand up and support my legislation. But on the wake of the College of DuPage report, what you should have done as the sitting governor is said, look, everybody's going to have an addendum in their contract, and those college trustees are going to pass it right now. And it says, you violate our laws, you are out with 0 severance. That's what should have happened. He controls the Board of Higher Ed. He controls the ICCB. And yet you have city colleges of Chicago putting out fake graduation rates, requesting tuition reimbursement from the state on classes that didn't comply, and not a word about him, about public corruption. That's an everyday event. Not a word, and it's the one thing that he is in charge of, enforcing our laws.
Representative Ives knows that I have battled corruption from day one, made major strides, and the bottom line is Speaker Madigan would love nothing more than Representative Ives to be the primary victor and to have to run against Pritzker. He would love nothing more, because I am the only person at this table that can beat Pritzker in November, and we will beat Pritzker in November, because we are fighting for everyone. This is not about Republicans versus Democrats. This is about taking power away from Madigan, giving it back to the people of Illinois, and we will win. We will win. Illinois is on the verge of becoming Detroit, hollowed out by corrupt politicians, massive job losses, massive tax hikes, self-dealing, and we're going to win because the people of Illinois feel it, they know it, and they know that we're fighting, we're going to change it.
To Bruce's point, though, about the title Worst Republican Governor, a lot of that did have to do with your signing of HB 40. I haven't talked to a single Republican who supports your version of how all of that went down. They all say you flipped, you changed your mind, you lied. So do you regret that? Do you regret signing that bill? And did you realize at the time how you would be drawing a primary challenge and really offending your base when you did it?
I support a woman's right to decide. And I said that during the campaign for election 4 years ago. And I personally do not believe a woman's income should determine whether she has that right. I don't focus on social issues. Social issues divide us.
That's all you got accomplished was a progressive social agenda.
Excuse me, please. I have not interrupted you. Please have respect for what I'm saying.
You go on and on.
We need to be united to fix our economic problems. That bill passed in the General Assembly, and I signed it because I support a woman's right to decide.
Okay, it was an expansion, though, and it covered state workers who are not necessarily low-income women. So I guess I'm confused as to why you didn't AV it when that was sort of, I thought, the plan leading up to that moment. And did you realize, if you could answer this question, that you were going to draw a primary challenge and really offend your base by changing your mind?
You know, there were a lot of politics swirling around that bill, and the simple fact is I support a woman's right to decide, and in the end, I had to choose to follow what I believe or do politics, and I chose to follow what I believe.
Governor, you keep giving us an answer. Excuse me, Steve. Just 1 second. You keep talking about this as though Kristen's asking an abortion question. Kristen's asking you a character question. We've got all kinds of people telling us, he told us this, he told them that. Help us walk through that, because it's really problematic. Telling different people I'm going to do different things.
That's why we don't trust him. We don't trust him.
To be crystal clear, I support a woman's right to decide.
What did you tell the Republican caucus? That's my question.
Politics are swirling around us, as I've said.
Well, what'd you tell him?
He told us he would veto the bill.
I publicly said that was being evaluated as an option. I publicly said it. It wasn't just to any caucus members.
That's right. Who lies to a cardinal?
It's outrageous. I publicly said that was being explored, and there was a lot of politics, a lot of pressure. In the end, I had to do what I believe is right, not do politics, and I signed that bill because I believe in a woman's right to decide.
What did you tell Cardinal Sipich you were going to do to the bill?
As I said to everyone, evaluating an mandatory veto was something that we looked at. And in the end, it wasn't going to be about politics for me. It was going to be about doing what I believe was right, and that's what I did.
So you're right. This is a character issue. That's exactly what this election's about. It's about character, and it's about courage.
Yep, and I was
it's about
courageous and did what I believe.
who has the courage to lead, who has the character for this job, who's going to stand up for the small person that's just beaten down by Illinois and its politics, who's not going to give in to crony bailouts of companies like Exelon, who's not going to give in to all sorts of new entitlement programs when the state is broke. So even if you believed that Illinois should pay for abortions, the fact that you did it when the state is bankrupt, an open-ended entitlement program in a state that is bankrupt. Listen, it's pretty depressing to think that Planned Parenthood just opened a brand new clinic in Flossmoor in a community that's 80% minority, one half in poverty, and just miles from the Indiana border. That's pretty depressing. You know why? There's zero accountability in our Medicaid program. There's zero. I'm sure we'll be paying for girls from Indiana that come over and get Medicaid abortions in the state of Illinois. And we have no money for this brand new entitlement program. And for him, as a Republican, because this is a Republican primary discussion, for him as a Republican to violate the Henry Hyde Amendment, the truce that's been in place for decades after the Roe v. Wade decision, the truce that said, fine, abortion's legal, but I shouldn't have to pay for it if I'm a taxpayer. He violated a strong tenet of our party, and then he lied about what he was going to do about it. That's why he's got very, very few endorsements on his side, and I've got more endorsements of my colleagues, and many are sitting on the fence. That's why not a single Republican in the congressional delegation has come out to endorse this sitting governor, because nobody trusts him, and nobody agrees with his policies. He sure did implement an agenda. It happened to be his wife's agenda. Socially progressive agenda from his wife in a state that is broke.
This is more false, vicious attacks.
It's not false. It's not vicious. I said it nicely. It's the truth.
And Madigan loves everything that you're saying, everything that you're doing. Social issues are divisive. We need to be united.
And you're the one who promised no social agenda and only implemented a social agenda. Let's talk about pro-life pregnancy centers being required to refer for abortion. I sat in your office with you. I was one of 6 legislators who walked into your office and said, this is wrong. This is wrong. There's Planned Parenthoods, there's all sorts of other pregnancy centers that refer for abortion, but you should not demand that pro-life pregnancy centers refer for abortion. How dare you sign a bill like that? That is just ridiculous. And then sanctuary state, I mean, it just goes on and on.
We're going to get to that in a minute, but I do want to have, I want to have a conversation with you, Representative Ives, about just ability to move policy. Because you said, where policy meets, it can be an easy haul. Where it doesn't, it can be rough. And I looked at the governor's turnaround agenda the other day. I don't think there's really anything on that 44-point agenda that you wouldn't have supported. Most of it, if not all of it, was filed in bill form at some point, sitting in rules. Madigan's not going to move them. So what do you think he could have done differently? What would you do differently to move your policy agenda forward when there is a philosophical difference between the way the majority thinks and the way you think?
Very good question. First of all, I have worked with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to move legislation forward.
Not some sweeping changes, though,
but we did a lot with community colleges in terms of contracts and contract transparency that got moved into the university system. But it doesn't take legislative approval to do things like ask for a Medicaid waiver from the federal government so that able-bodied adults have to actually be employed or in a job training system or actually volunteer. You don't need legislative authority to actually put some metrics of accountability on that thing. You didn't need to do that. You didn't need legislative authority to actually propose a balanced budget. He never proposed a balanced budget. So he could have started out with that as well. You didn't need legislative authority to actually set goals for higher education. Look, when you look across our universities, Our universities are 20 to 50 times higher than their conference peers. There was no goal setting with higher education to say, oh, by the way, you're either going to come in line with your conference peers in terms of tuition and fees, or we're going to put you in line with state support. Because right now, we give far more state support per full-time equivalent status than our conference peers. In fact, we're number 3 in the United States in terms of full-time equivalent.
Some of these changes, like right-to-work zones, term limits, redistricting reform,
I'll give you one.
On the workers' comp reform. What is going to be different about Governor Jeannie Ives
There's
in
no
getting Mike Madigan to move these things out of rules? You can't even get some of your own bills, which we've supported, out of rules.
I understand. So then, if you can't get Mike Madigan to move on legislation, you work on other things that you can. One thing Mike Madigan did put out there was a property tax freeze bill, and it was the exact same thing that the governor wanted for a property tax freeze. And the governor called me prior to session, and he said, I don't vote for that. I said, I want to vote for that property tax freeze bill. Madigan's got it out there. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the same thing that you wanted. Call his bluff. Let's vote for property tax freeze. We should be all in and call Madigan's bluff. No, don't do that, Representative Ives. We've got a tactics and some strategy, and we're not going to do that. So sure enough, the entire caucus decided they're not going to vote for the property tax freeze just because it was under Madigan's name and not the governor's name. That's ridiculous. If it's good policy, we're going to vote for good policy.
Well, you voted present on it too with everybody else.
We voted for a property tax freeze 18 times. 18 times, but you know what you do? You apply the pressure. If he's going to force the policy, then you call his bluff and you put it forward. And you see where it ends up, and then you can actually go to his members and say, you voted for the House, get it out of the Senate now. We're going to call you out on it. So that didn't happen.
Why not?
So, Kristen,
same thing with worker comp.
The representative has said things that aren't true repeatedly. Let me give you an example. She has said that I have not introduced balanced budgets. I have introduced balanced budgets every year that I've been governor. They have been ignored by the General Assembly. I will be introducing another balanced budget 3 weeks from now, and that will include a tax cut. I will propose reforms so we can run a small surplus and begin to cut back every year Madigan's income tax hike that he passed over my veto. And Representative Ives has already said she would wait a few years before reducing the income tax. We should start reducing our income taxes right now to show the world that we're going to become competitive so that we can bring more jobs here to expand our tax base. This is what our primary goal needs to be. Make Illinois more competitive so we can have the money to also be more compassionate to support those most vulnerable. That's what I'm committed to doing.
Governor Rauner let that 32% tax hike happen. He let it happen. And for him to say that he can now reverse it, when he had 15 members of our caucus sign on to the Democrat-sponsored 32% tax increase, he didn't make a single phone call. All the dirty deeds happened up on the 6th floor. Members were brought up there. They made a little pack and they decided to vote for it. Because at that point they had lost confidence in the governor of getting anything done. As well as he didn't call. We never took a caucus vote on an important bill like that. He's responsible for the 32% tax increase now. He says he wants to get rid of it. Now, I mean, honestly, who's being the realist here? He can make all the promises he wants, but that has to happen legislatively as well. So at least I'm not going to make unrealistic promises. You have to budget to the number that you want and prove to people that you could actually balance the budget with less money. But we have to pay off our back bills first. We have to do that. And then we have to show legislators that we have the ability to do this.
So
do I think we need to decrease taxes? Absolutely. It's the number one reason people flee this state. There's no doubt. That is the number one reason.
Did you do everything you could to stop that?
I sure as heck did. I battled for 3 years. Speaker Madigan was pushing to do a tax hike from day one. I fought it and fought it and fought it, and I made so many calls to members of the General Assembly to not vote for that tax increase, and when I vetoed it, to make sure that my veto stood. And I worked hard. We were able to pull 5 members of the General Assembly off, and we worked them all, but 10 of them went with Madigan.
He's talking about the override. He's talking about the override. That's ridiculous. All those calls should have happened before. They happened afterwards.
Governor, can I ask you about jobs? Tell us big in October 2014, you said your opponent Pat Quinn is a miserable failure on jobs. Illinois is one of the lowest job creating states in the area.
Yep.
It's a failure on the results. U.S. Bureau of Labor labor statistics data shows that Illinois job growth in the last 3 years of the administration was about 7%, about 2/3 of the national rate. The first 3 years of the Rauner administration, job growth was 2.9%, about half the national rate, lowest among our surrounding states. Are you an even more miserable failure?
I'm a more passionate advocate for it. You know what? All the states around us have now changed their regulations to be much more pro-business and pro-growth. They are stealing our jobs. We are losing our jobs to Wisconsin and Indiana and Iowa and Kentucky. We're bleeding out our jobs. That has changed in the last 3 or 4 years for most of those states. I'm trying to get us to change. Madigan so far has blocked the changes, but we're going to win these in the courts. And
Here's how I would have done a better
please,
deal.
Please, I'm speaking, please.
Okay.
Let's be respectful. We are going to probably win in the courts. I will be able to bring about the same changes in Illinois that the other states around us have made through the court system, because I'm not patient. I'm not going to wait for Speaker Madigan to do it with me. We're going to get it done unilaterally. This is an exciting time in Illinois. I've worked hard. We've grown about 120,000 net new jobs. It's been hard work because which I hope he's not after November, we will get changes through the courts that will allow us to compete. And the companies will come from Indiana. They'll come from Indiana. They'll come from Wisconsin and Texas and Tennessee. We will be a rapid growth state. That will happen.
Let's just talk about jobs a little bit here. I was one of 5 people to vote against the EDGE credit extension because it's still a crony deal. It's still something that you have to go to permission from the big brother to get on whether or not you're going to get a special credit for bringing jobs here. So I find it kind of troubling that they cut a deal, and this is emblematic of everything that's happened here. You're just not getting good deals done. They cut a deal with the candy company, Haribo, and they said, look, we'll give you $30,000 per job for 55 jobs if you locate those in Rosemont. So Haribo took the deal. Who doesn't want $1.6 million? And their corporate headquarters, you know, those folks want to be closer to a city. And yet, what did they do with their manufacturing? They located their 200-plus jobs manufacturing brand new facility across the state line in Prairie Pleasant, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
That's what they did.
That's right.
You know what? If you're not going to put your manufacturing in the state of Illinois, then you're not going to get your corporate jobs here. I mean,
All
that would have been
jobs
an
are good.
easy thing to say
All
no
jobs.
to. It would have been an easy thing to say no to. Instead, they just cut a deal, and it's not a deal that, you know, Governor Ives would have made.
Every state that's growing fast has some version of the EDGE tax credit program. If we didn't have one, we would be even worse off than we are. I don't like getting
You didn't
special
work on
tax
fundamentals.
incentives. I don't like special incentives. What I'd like is a level playing field with low taxes for everyone, low regulations for everyone, so we have free enterprise economy that's booming. That's what we're working to achieve. Other states around us have done it. If we do it, we will be the fastest growing state in the Midwest rather than the laggard.
Representative Ives,
Yes.
let me ask you the same question I asked the governor, which is, if the Supreme Court doesn't come down the way he expects it to, compulsory unionism, what can you do to counter all the problems that Republicans want to change?
Well, when I served on Wheaton City Council, the only thing that union membership understood were layoffs. It's the only thing they understood. So if you can't impose your final best offer because the courts have blocked it, then you just start laying people off. That's what you do. That's what Wheaton had to do in 2008 after the recession. They started laying people off.
Could you explain, just looking back, you used to be allies. You used to carry a lot of his bills.
Oh, yeah.
So what happened?
Well, you know, I'll tell you what happened. I understood very quickly that Governor Rauner isn't who I thought he was. And it began in 2015 in an education approach committee meeting when his wife's special not-for-profit Ounce for Prevention came in. And they wanted to continue the Quinn outreach from the federal government that said if you put $20 million in for every year for the next 4 years, if the federal to get $20 million every year for the next 4 years from the federal government, you had to escalate putting in additional funds from Illinois taxpayers just to fund a very narrow 4-year-old preschool program. So in 4 years, this program would have put in nearly $500 million more to just a nearly tailed 4-year-old preschool program. That's it. That's it. And his wife's group, Ounce of Prevention, was all for it. And I walked into his staff and I said, do you know we can't afford to have $400 million more over the next 4 years to go just to 4-year-old preschool? Do you know we are broke? And his staff just didn't do anything with it. They continued to go and try and get that grant and then count it as an accomplishment. That's outrageous. So it started with there. But then you saw the crony stuff happen. Like, who gives Exelon, a $2.2 billion net income company, a $2.35 billion ratepayer subsidy, especially considering that 25% of our energy is, well, we have excess of 40% energy. We produce 40% more than we need. But 25% of that goes across state lines. So that rate hike that he had put in place with Exelon is going to subsidize energy in other people's states. And it also, Exelon at that same time argued against the same crony thing in Ohio when it was used against them. So Amendment number 10, the morning in December, is getting negotiated. His staff knows it's a bad deal, but they just needed a win at that point in December of 2016, a win on something. And they bought into the idea that Exelon was going to shut out these jobs,
So
which is completely untrue.
Broadly
Cronyism.
speaking, what happened
Cronyism.
with this relationship? And
I just saw him for he was. He was ineffective. Didn't go and try and get things done that he could have gotten done. I'll give you an example on that. And then he doubled down on just, ridiculing you if you were a social conservative.
Oh, come
And then
on.
just
let me
financially
jump
hurting
in
us.
here.
But let me tell you the one thing that he could have gotten across the line. It was pretty obvious to me that he hired a bunch of staff that didn't understand policy, had never worked at the local level, and so they were constantly getting on the wrong track in bringing people together to work holistically. Look, a lot of the Democrats, a lot of the Republicans, we've worked at the local level, and we understand how holistically things fit together. He brought in a bunch of political staffers that just didn't know what they were doing. And then he didn't want to know the details well enough to lead the policy discussion, which is why you got the bad education bill, why you got the Exelon bill, why you got a grand bargain where at first he wanted nothing to do with it, and then apparently he put the brakes on it. It was a disaster. One thing that I think Illinois is ready for, and should have been the sole focus, is pension reform that begins with new hires going to a 401k. And I say this because universally, if I talk to a firefighter, a police officer, a teacher, they understand new hires going to a 401k. That would have been a huge win, and it would have been achievable if you had made the conversation, had these conversations around the state to win the reform. Why? Because I've had these conversations with Democrats who understand that that's where we need to go. I gave a briefing to 160 folks that sit on firefighter pension boards. And a lady came up afterwards and said, look, I'm very liberal, but I absolutely agree with what you're talking about for pension reform. One more thing, though. This 401k thing would have signaled, though. It would have sent a strong signal. It's an easy pickup. We can do it because we already have the program. It would have sent a strong signal to the bond markets, to the business community, and to residents that we were finally serious about doing something about not digging the hole deeper. Instead, he started to play around with a consideration model, and then you get a Tier 3 hybrid model that actually is going to do nothing because the bill's not even
that's
in
almost
place.
as far as Democrats are willing to go, though, on that.
I don't agree. I don't agree because I've been in conversations with them, and if you lead on this policy, you can get this done. You have to win the argument with people, and you have to build the coalitions to do it, and we are there.
That was quite a filibustering screed by the representative there. Thank you for allowing me to speak a little bit. I appreciate the opportunity. First of all, pension reform. We've recommended pension reform and advocated for it every year I've been governor. We can save billions of dollars with it, and we believe, and most of the Democrat staff believe, that what we've recommended is constitutional. As a compromise, in order to get something done, I agreed and negotiated a pension agreement with President Cullerton, Democrat leader in the Senate. He and I agreed. We were coming to a press conference. Some of your staff was going to be there. At the last minute, President Cullerton didn't show up. I was there alone at the press conference. What happened? Speaker Madigan got a hold of John that morning and said, you're not going to do that agreement with the governor. You're not going to show up at the press conference. This is off. Okay, Speaker Madigan killed pension reform that the Democrats had agreed to. This had been proposed by Democrats and unions 5 years earlier. That's an example of what we're dealing with. You need to understand that. Number two, the representative was critical of the Future Energy Jobs Act. Fair enough. You know what? There are people who love it, people who don't like it. The simple fact is it was good bipartisan compromise that was hailed as historic and...
Congressman, am I missing anything here?
No, you're not. The central player in this entire drama
needed. His staff knows it's a bad deal, but they just needed a win at that point in December of 2016, a win on something. And they bought into the idea that Exelon was going to shut out these jobs,
So
which is completely untrue.
Broadly speaking, what happened
Cronyism.
with this relationship? And
I just saw him for he was. He was ineffective. Didn't go and try and get things done that he could have gotten done. I'll give you an example on that. And then he doubled down on just, ridiculing you if you were a social conservative.
Oh, come
And then
on.
just
let me
financially
jump in
hurting us.
here.
But let me tell you the one thing that he could have gotten across the line. It was pretty obvious to me that he hired a bunch of staff that didn't understand policy, had never worked at the local level, and so they were constantly getting on the wrong track in bringing people together to work holistically. Look, a lot of the Democrats, a lot of the Republicans, we've worked at the local level and we understand how holistically things fit together. He brought in a bunch of political staffers that just didn't know what they were doing. And then he didn't want to know the details well enough to lead the policy discussion, which is why you got the bad education bill, why you got the Exelon bill, why you got a grand bargain where at first he wanted nothing to do with it, and then apparently he put the brakes on it. It was a disaster. One thing that I think Illinois is ready for, and should have been the sole focus, is pension reform that begins with new hires going to a 401k. And I say this because universally, if I talk to a firefighter, a police officer, a teacher, they understand new hires going to a 401k. That would have been a huge win, and it would have been achievable if you had made the conversation, had these conversations around the state to win the reform. Why? Because I've had these conversations with Democrats who understand that that's where we need to go. I gave a briefing to 160 folks that sit on firefighter pension boards. And a lady came up afterwards and said, look, I'm very liberal, but I absolutely agree with what you're talking about for pension reform. One more thing, though. This 401k thing would have signaled, though. It would have sent a strong signal. It's an easy pickup. We can do it because we already have the program. It would have sent a strong signal to the bond markets, to the business community, and to residents that we were finally serious about doing something about not digging the hole deeper. Instead, he started to play around with a consideration model, and then you get a Tier 3 hybrid model that actually is going to do nothing because the bill's not even
that's
in
almost
place.
as far as Democrats are willing to go, though, on that.
I don't agree. I don't agree because I've been in conversations with them, and if you lead on this policy, you can get this done. You have to win the argument with people, and you have to build the coalitions to do it, and we are there.
I'm going to let the governor jump in.
That was quite a filibustering screed by the representative there. Thank you for allowing me to speak a little bit. I appreciate the opportunity. First of all, pension reform. We've recommended pension reform and advocated for it every year I've been governor. We could save billions of dollars with it, and we believe, and most of the Democrat staff believe, that what we've recommended is constitutional. As a compromise, in order to get something done, I agreed and negotiated a pension agreement with President Cullerton, Democrat leader in the Senate. He and I agreed. We were coming to a press conference. Some of your staff was going to be there. At the last minute, President Cullerton didn't show up. I was there alone at the press conference. What happened? Speaker Madigan got a hold of John that morning and said, you're not going to do that agreement with the governor. You're not going to show up at the press conference. This is off. Okay, Speaker Madigan killed pension reform that the Democrats had agreed to. This had been proposed by Democrats and unions 5 years earlier. That's an example of what we're dealing with. You need to understand that. Number two, the representative was critical of the Future Energy Jobs Act. Fair enough. You know what? There are people who love it, people who don't like it. The simple fact is it was good bipartisan compromise that was hailed as historic and...
I was born in 1970.